Winning the draft lottery is a franchise-defining moment because, more often than not, the first pick in the draft becomes a great NBA player. 65% of all players drafted first overall became All-Stars, 38% made at least one All-NBA team, and 18% became MVPs. There have been a total of 77 NBA drafts, and consequently, 77 first overall picks. But these are the top 10 best number 1 picks in NBA history. And starting at number 10, we have the first pick of the 2012 NBA draft, Anthony Davis. Even though he's never won the Defensive Player of the Year award, Anthony Davis is arguably the most versatile defender in NBA history. Standing at 6'11" with an unreal 7'6" wingspan, crazy athleticism, and almost unprecedented mobility for a guy his size, Davis has the perfect defensive toolbox for a modern big man. But it's not just his athleticism. What sets AD apart is his immaculate feel for the game, understanding of defensive schemes, and precision in guarding both the roll man and the ball handler in pick and roll. All those skills allow Davis to guard 1 through 5, making him a dominant defender both in the paint and on the perimeter. There are only a handful of players who can even be mentioned in the same sentence as Davis when it comes to defensive versatility. But for the modern NBA, with spread offenses that require big men to switch and run after the Steph Currys of the world, AD might be the best defensive player ever. And on top of his Spider-Man-like defensive reflexes, AD is a hell of an offensive player too.
Anthony Davis looks spectacular.
Yes.
He looks unstoppable. He looks like a top 5 player on the planet.
With a soft touch around the basket, a polished mid-range jumper, and the ball handling of a guard, Davis is averaging 24 points per game on 52% shooting for his career, and is even better in the playoffs with 26 points and 54% shooting, which is astonishing production for somebody whose primary skill is defense. The Browns spent the first part of his career in New Orleans with insufficient talent around him, but when he got to LA, he was arguably the best player on a team that won the 2020 NBA title. Due to his quiet demeanor, injuries, and the fact that he joined the biggest superstar in the NBA to win a ring, he often gets forgotten when there's a discussion about the best players in the NBA. But don't get it twisted. Anthony Davis is an absolute monster and is the second best number 1 pick of this millennium. Being forgotten isn't an issue for the number 9 player on this list because even today, more than a decade after his retirement, he's more popular than the majority of current NBA players. We're talking about the first pick of the best draft class of all time, the man they called the Answer, Allen Iverson. At 6 feet and 155 pounds, AI was the shortest and lightest number 1 pick ever. And despite some absolute legends being drafted in 1996, Philadelphia can't be mad for picking him first overall. Sure, he was a below-average defender and inefficient scorer, but the passion AI played with made him one of the most transcendent players of all time. Iverson changed how the point guard position was played, reverting from the pass-first mold of Magic Johnson, John Stockton, and Jason Kidd, and blazing a new way for shoot-first, ask-questions-later guards that came after him. But the biggest impact AI had was on the culture. Before Iverson, nobody had tattoos, nobody was wearing hip-hop style clothes to games, and nobody was so unapologetically himself like the Answer. Iverson's MVP season and leading the Sixers to the 2001 Finals was legendary. And even though he never won the title, he was the people's champion, winning the hearts of fans worldwide. With 4 scoring titles, 3-time steals leader, and 11 All-Star appearances, Iverson was the fastest and deadliest point guard of his era. Defenders had fear in their hearts when they needed to guard him.
Allen Iverson, he was really, really tough. And there was a game where he dropped 44 on me in Philadelphia.
Because they didn't want to get embarrassed by his deadly crossover. Kobe gave Iverson the biggest compliment. We're fortunate that Allen Iverson isn't 6'5", because even at 6 foot, AI's 26.6 points per game ranks in the top 10 all time. Now, before we get to the 8th best number 1 pick, we're going to name some players who didn't make the cut, but definitely deserve to be mentioned. And we'll start with the player who often gets compared to Iverson, Kyrie Irving. The first pick of the 2011 draft is probably a better overall player than Iverson, with an ambidextrous handle, the ability to jump off both feet, and a deep bag of of spins, fakes, and crossovers, Kyrie is the best ball handler of all time. Irving is a much better shooter and more efficient scorer than AI. Kyrie also has an NBA championship to his name after hitting one of the biggest shots in NBA Finals history. But due to AI's cultural impact, he has to rank above Kyrie, even though it's very close. Other notable number one picks who deserve a mention are Elgin Baylor, Elvin Hayes, Bill Walton, and Patrick Ewing, who were all first ballot Hall of Famers. But none of them were quite as good as the number 8 player on this list, who did something that seems unimaginable for most people. After he got selected with the first pick in the 1987 draft, he decided to pass on the NBA and millions of dollars in order to serve in the Navy. Of course, we're talking about the Admiral, David Robinson, a 7'1" center who could run the floor like a gazelle and looked like he was competing in Mr. Olympia. In the first 7 years of his career, Robinson led the league in rebounding, blocks, and scoring, averaging 25 points, 12 rebounds, 3 assists, 1.7 steals, and 3.6 blocks per game. In that 7-year span, Robinson won Rookie of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, and MVP, while making an All-Defensive and All-NBA team in each season. In the next 7 years, injuries slowed him down and his numbers decreased, but the Admiral still averaged 21 points, 10 rebounds, and 3 blocks for his career. And most importantly, he won 2 NBA championships with the Spurs in '99 and 2003. And at number 7, we have another player who loved to stuff the stat sheet. In fact, he was known as Mr. Triple-Double before triple-doubles were even really a thing. Oscar Robertson was selected first overall in the 1960 NBA draft, and in his first 6 seasons, he averaged 30.4 points, 10 rebounds, and 10.7 assists. Big O was the LeBron James of the 60s, standing at 6'5" and 210 pounds with excellent handles and shooting ability. The opposing guards were no match for Robertson, who bullied them with a combination of size and speed that was unprecedented at the time. With 1 scoring title and 6 times leading the NBA in assists, Oscar was the first player to lead the league in both categories, and is still one of only 7 players ever with that accomplishment. In 1971, Big O teamed up with Kareem to win an NBA championship with the Bucks, and he retired as a 12-time All-Star and the all-time leader in assists. But at number 6, we have a player who is still the all-time leader in a statistical category, and that's blocks. He was the first pick of the 1984 draft, taken 2 spots ahead of Michael Jordan. But unlike Portland, who can never forgive themselves for picking Sam Bowie, the Houston Rockets made the right choice for drafting Hakeem Olajuwon. Hakeem first started playing basketball at 17, but due to his soccer background, he had unbelievable coordination and footwork for a center. And because he started playing so late, he wasn't thinking like the prototypical center. Hakeem always wanted to play like a guard, and that's what he became, a guard in a center's body. No other center of his era moved like Olajuwon.
Hakeem, he was very unpredictable on the block. You thought he was going right, he would go left.
Nobody had the feints, the spins, and of course, nobody could shake like the Dream. The Dream Shake was one of the most unstoppable moves of all time, and that's why Hakeem was one of the best post players ever. On top of 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards, and being an all-time blocks leader, Hakeem is also one of the top 10 all-time for steals, and the only big man in the top 10. With nearly 27,000 career points, Hakeem is 13th on the all-time scoring list, and it's hard to say whether Hakeem was better offensively or defensively, as Dream was one of the rare players that was simultaneously among the best offensive and defensive players in the NBA. Olajuwon won 2 NBA championships, and his second title game came against the most dominant player ever, who's also the number 5 on our list. And Shaquille O'Neal, as dominant and confident as he is, will be the first to tell you that he wasn't the best player in college. However, despite the defensive greatness of Alonzo Mourning and the 2 NCAA titles of Christian Laettner, only a blind man would select those 2 in front of the specimen that was Shaq. The Big Diesel was the first pick of the 1992 NBA draft, and in the next 14 seasons, he averaged 26 points, 12 rebounds, 3 assists, and 2.5 blocks, leading the NBA in field goal percentage 9 times. There was no stopping the Shaq attack.
This is the dude, though, that you really admire and respect as dominant on both ends of the court. I used to brag to my friends a lot and say, like, after we played the Lakers, I get to the crib and be like, yo, you seen how I laid Shaq, didn't you? You know what I mean?
Especially during his three-peat run with the Lakers, where he bullied 7-foot centers like they were children. In his first 14 seasons, O'Neal made 6 NBA Finals and won 4 championships. And only Jordan and LeBron have more Finals MVPs than the big Aristotle. In the last 5 seasons of his career, Shaq got a bit chubby, and his numbers decreased as he was switching teams trying to chase one more ring. But anyone who watched him in his prime knows how truly unstoppable Shaq was. And at number 4, we have a guy who was one of Shaq's biggest rivals. He's the greatest player ever at his position, and yet is still somehow underrated. Tim Duncan was supposed to be an Olympic swimmer, but after a hurricane destroyed the only pool in St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands, he took up basketball. And 7 years later, the 6'11" power forward became the best collegiate player in the country, and had half the NBA enamored over the number 1 pick and the opportunity to draft him. But the Spurs had the most luck, and for the next 19 years, Duncan was the most boringly good basketball player on the planet.
I was learning from him. He came in with a tremendous skill set. I was incredibly impressed.
Duncan never took over games in the last few minutes, hitting impossible shots like Kobe Bryant or Larry Bird or Michael Jordan. He wasn't dunking people into oblivion like Shaq, nor making flashy behind-the-back passes like Jokic. The big fundamental played the same way in almost all situations, making the right basketball play. Score when you have the open shot, make your jump hooks and bank shots. Pass the ball to an open teammate, close out rebounds, lock the paint, and be smarter than your opponent.
You better than Duncan?
No, Tim Duncan's the greatest power forward ever.
Timmy quietly dominated the league for years, without controversy, without crazy trash talk, with deadpan short answers to the media, and the worst fashion sense in NBA history. But when he retired, he left with 5 championships, 3 Finals MVPs, and 2 regular season MVPs. Duncan is the all-time leader in all defensive selections with 15, while nobody else has more than 12. Timmy also made 15 All-NBA teams, trailing only LeBron James. He's in the top 6 players of all time in blocks and rebounds, and has won 1,001 regular season games, which is the 3rd best mark ever. Duncan's whole career was so good and so consistent that his elite play just became normalized amongst fans, and that's why he's one of the most underrated greats ever. And if Duncan was the quiet killer, no one was as flashy as the 3rd best number 1 pick ever. And we're talking about the conductor of the Showtime Lakers, Magic Johnson. Even though Magic wasn't an elite 2-way player like Duncan, Hakeem, and some other all-time greats, he almost always found a way to get the victory. After defeating Larry Bird in the 1979 NCAA championship game, Magic was selected first in the 1979 draft and won the NBA championship and the Finals MVP in his rookie season. During his 12-year career, Johnson made the Finals a whopping 9 times, winning 5 NBA championships and 3 Finals MVPs and 3 regular season MVPs. The man was a born winner, and to this day, Johnson holds the record for the best winning percentage in NBA history, emerging victorious in 74% of his games. And most of those victories came next to another great winner, another underrated player who might have the best resume in basketball history. That would be the number 2 player on this list, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who won 3 championships in high school with a 79-2 overall record, and then repeated the same thing in college, winning 3 national championships with an 86-2 record. The man lost just 4 times in 169 games, after which he got drafted first overall in the NBA and the ABA in 1969, along with $1 million offer to join the Harlem Globetrotters. But Kareem chose the NBA and the Milwaukee Bucks.
For me to go to Milwaukee was really a step away from everything that I knew.
Where in 6 years, he averaged 30 points, 15 rebounds, 4 assists, and 4 blocks per game, with 2 finals appearances and 1 NBA title. And then, in 1976, Jabbar went to LA, where he won 4 more titles and 3 more MVPs, pushing his MVP total to 6, which is the NBA record. Kareem finished top 5 in MVP voting in 15 out of his 20 NBA seasons, with 15 All-NBA nods and 11 All-Defensive selections. Jabbar was the best player in the NBA for a whole decade. His skyhook is arguably the greatest offensive weapon in league history, and his trophy cabinet cabinet has to be the biggest of all players that ever played basketball. But Kareem is not the number one player on this list, simply because the player above him is not human. That's the only explanation for how LeBron James is still so good nearing his 40th birthday after 22 NBA seasons.
I feel real good on how I'm playing the game. Not only physically, but more importantly, just like mentally.
It's very rare that a player is big, strong, fast, and is able to jump out of the gym. And it's even more rare to have a photographic memory with a supercomputer brain for basketball. But LeBron has all that. And when you add in his maniacal work ethic into the mix, you get the most complete basketball player of all time. 20 years after he became the first pick in the 2003 NBA draft, LeBron became the NBA's all-time leading scorer, breaking Kareem's record.
I feel like I can make plays. I can make plays to help us win. I feel like I'm, still a threat out on the floor, and still able to do the things that I was doing 10 years ago.
And since there's no sign that he'll stop playing soon, LeBron will likely go well past the 40,000 point mark and put his record out of reach for eternity. The King is also top 5 all-time in assists, the all-time playoff leader in scoring, has the most playoff wins, most All-NBA selections, and most All-NBA first-team selections, just to name a few of his records. And though he probably won't catch Jordan in terms of championships, LeBron has somehow exceeded the enormous expectations he had entering the league. And that's why he's the best number 1 pick of all time.